Wow.
So you can't tell sometimes.
I know.
That's
See,
the
now we could do
secret.
drunk Gen Con history.
just-
That'd be even better.
There we go.
If you
Then
just,
I would tell the other
if you
story.
just act, you just got to act crazy all the time. What?
Oh, shit.
Oh my God.
You're on, Pete.
Hello, welcome to Fireside with Peter Adkison. We are at Gen Con 2019 here in Indianapolis, broadcasting. We didn't bring the fire, actually, but sorry, it's still Fireside. Thank you for joining us. My co-host today, Kristen Jensen.
Hello.
Our guests are Matt Forbeck, Luke Gygax, and Lisa Stevens. As you know, if you've watched our episodes before on Fireside, we go in search of the untold stories behind your favorite games. And today, we're doing behind the scenes of all games because we're doing behind the scenes on Gen Con history. And and Gen Con is at the center, of course, of the gaming universe. At least that's our position on
Oh,
this.
yeah.
Best 4 days in gaming.
Best 4 days in gaming.
Exactly.
What I hear.
So, thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Matt, Luke, and Lisa for joining us. As I get into, so I'm going to start with Luke. So, Luke Gygax, first of all, introduce yourselves for our audience. For those rare, there's like three people out there on the internet that don't know who you are.
I'm sure. My name's Luke Gygax. I'm one of the sons of Gary Gygax, who co-wrote Dungeons & Dragons with a guy named Dave Arneson, and he also founded a little convention called Gen Con in 1968 in our hometown of Lake Geneva. Yay, Gen Con.
Hey, thanks. Excellent. And so before we start, let's do introductions across the board. Matt?
I'm
Forbeck?
Matt Forbeck. This is my 38th Gen Con in a row. I've been coming since I was a little kid. And I'm a game designer and a writer of novels and all sorts of other crazy stuff.
Yeah, great.
Lisa Stevens, this is my 36th Gen Con in a row. Going back to UW Parkside. I'm the CEO of Paizo Inc., worked at Wizards of the Coast, worked at White
Worked
Wolf.
at Wizards of
worked
the
at
Coast.
blah,
Yeah,
blah,
we
blah.
did work there, didn't we?
We did work there. So I've been in the industry since '87
Right.
at Gen Con. So.
Nice. Excellent. So I think in terms of starting our walk down memory lane, I think the sensible way to talk about this is go kind of chronologically and go clear back to the very beginning. Now, I wasn't there at the beginning, but Luke was there, and so
Technically.
Luke you were what, a kid?
I was a twinkle in my dad's eye in 1968, but I was born in 1970.
You were born in 1970.
Yes.
So you might have been at like Gen Con 3
Yes,
as
I'm sure.
an
Maybe.
infant.
Absolutely. So the early Gen Cons were held in Horticultural Hall, American Legion Hall, and a place, the Guild Hall, which I don't even know if it exists anymore. I think that's something gone now to history.
Right.
But
In Lake Geneva, Wisconsin.
In Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, which is
Right.
just a tiny town of about 6,000 people. And
It was a Geneva convention, wasn't it?
It was. So my dad was a war
Save that
gamer,
one.
and he belonged to the International Federation of Wargaming, the IFW.
Yes, IFW.
And so they decided, they'd heard about these science fiction conventions and stuff like that, and my dad was, had a gathering, he liked to have people over, he's like, man, we could fit more people, I just live in this small house, my wife would kill me, my mom would kill him if he had any more gamers over than like a dozen, right? Yeah, that was enough. I was the fifth child, so he had a house full of small children already. So they figured out, well, we could rent the Horticultural Hall for one day for the princely sum of $50.
$50.
And so that's what they did, and they broke even that year. And my dad planned the whole thing. He was like, yes. I remember him telling that story many times.
And I've seen sketches of it. 2 years ago for Gen Con 50, we hosted a press event to sort of begin our campaign for Gen Con 50 at Horticultural Hall.
Yes.
We kind of replicated it a bit.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah.
They even had the computer there to do the calculations, the old
Yeah,
clunky
that's
computer.
awesome.
It was pretty, that was cool.
So what's your earliest Gen Con memory?
My earliest Gen Con memory, they kind of blend together because there was also like Spring Revel and Winter Fantasies were also held at the American Legion Hall.
Right.
But for me, it's obviously playing games with people. As just a little kid, my sisters would work behind the counter selling soda and hot dogs.
Yes.
to all the gamers, and they were
Yes.
the Gygax girls were very famous in the early
Yes.
early days.
Well, there weren't many games at conventions.
No.
Girls. There
Girls,
weren't many
that's true.
girls at conventions.
That's true, and
those
they're all
days.
redheaded, and so
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
the thing. So my earliest memories is people would begin to ask my dad for his autograph
Right.
because Dungeons and Dragons was just hitting,
Right.
and so my sister Heidi, I think she was probably 15 or something. She was dating another young man, and he had seen me asking people, "Do you want my autograph?" I was like, my dad's Gary Gygax. My dad's Gary Gygax.
Do you want my autograph?
Do you want my autograph? So he made a T-shirt with the iron-on letters from like 70s style, and it was like a ringer T-shirt and everything. With
Right.
and said, my dad is Gary Gygax. He created D&D, and then on the back in rainbow letters, "Do you want my autograph?" So that
Well,
was.
I think that's the next Gen Con official merch item.
There you
I think
go.
My dad is Gary Gygax, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so that's
awesome.
probably-
and
that's
we
probably
gotta get
early
Luke's
memories.
picture on it.
Oh,
There
yeah.
you go. Yeah.
We should do that. Luke's picture. My dad is Gary Gygax.
Do you want my autograph?
Gen Con. My dad started Gen Con.
That's right. Yeah.
That's
right.
right.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
did.
that'd be great.
He did. So he did. He started Gen Con. Awesome move. And here we are.
Right.
How many people? Like almost, I don't know, 70,000 people. It's huge. The city.
2.4 million. I
A
think
whole
is the
city
latest
comes.
count.
Yeah.
Right.
Comes here, and and then D&D and the Dragon magazine. Those were like the trifecta of things that really got the industry rolling. And Gen Con is still a huge piece. It's where people come together. Ideas are shared. In fact, D&D was created because people came together, and there was that exchange of ideas, and bam.
And that's why talking about Gen Con is behind the scenes of all games, really.
Yes.
It's the Gen Con, and I think, to be fair, the convention scene, of course, shows like Origins and conventions throughout Europe, throughout the world. Tabletop game conventions have just been, especially when we were younger as a community, a place where you could go and realize there are other people like me, other people that play these weird games, and that's what. So, do you any story? And your father there must have been some family lore around Gen Con that you don't necessarily remember. I'm wondering if we can get you to channel the spirit of your father a little bit. How did he feel about Gen Con?
I think, he obviously loved it because he got to bring in all sorts of people and play games. So it'd be
Right.
hours and hours and hours of games. That's what my home was like regularly. So if it wasn't Gen Con, there'd be people who just came over and would hang out and play games
Right.
with my dad. What would I do with my dad? We would hang out and play games. That's
Right.
that is how we related. So for Gen Con, it was, especially in the early years, I think the early years it was a lot of fun, and he was very involved in running it and playing games. And then, of course, what happens when you own a convention? Right. You don't get to game during
Right,
the convention
right,
anymore, right? So I
right.
think then it became more business, and I think that
Right.
was probably less fun, but very important to
So
drive the.
Did
you
you
know,
grumble about that, maybe? You don't really-
you know what? He never did. I think he never did. He really was always felt humbled by people coming up and talking to him, and he wanted to give them that time when someone came up to him and spoke to him and said, "Wow, this game you made did change my life." He would listen to him, and he would give them that focus and that attention because he realized that was important for them,
And-
he wanted to give them that feeling.
And so, as we all know, as the world knows, Gary and Dave Arneson invented Dungeons and Dragons. But that came several years after Gen Con
Yes.
began. So what were they playing at Gen Con for like the 10 years that Gen Con was happening before Dungeons and Dragons was even invented?
I think in about 69, I believe, there was a game called Braunstein that a gentleman named Dave Wesley brought, and that was sort of, I think it was kind of inspired. He wanted people to play a role in a scenario, whether you're the commander of an army, or opposing armies, or the mayor, or the resistance, and each person had a role and had like an objective that was different, and there was a referee. And I think it might have been something like that came out of like play-by-mail diplomacy kind of influence as well.
Right.
So maybe they were writing down things and passing them to the referee, and then he was telling them adjudicating what happened. So that game was going out. Siege at Bodenberg, which had the elastilin miniatures, like they're 40 millimeters, a little bit bigger elastilin miniatures, really cool looking.
And
that
these
was-
are games that are kind of credited
Yes.
as inspirations for Dungeons and Dragons.
Correct. So the Siege
Yeah.
of Bodenberg stimulated my dad's interest in medieval stuff
Right.
because there were the medieval miniatures. And then what Dave Wesley doing Braunstein, Dave Arneson saw that.
Yeah.
And he thought, I could do a medieval Braunstein, and I'll just bring my people playing there. It would be, Peter the Barbarian.
Right.
You're great,
Right.
Lisa the Wizard, whatever it is, and you would be that character in their world, and they created Blackmore.
Right.
And so he had the idea of you're playing yourself, sort of,
Yeah.
but you gain experience as you go on. He didn't call it experience. I just think he gave them, oh, you did really well there. I'm gonna give you +1 to strength. So next time you roll a strength thing, remind me you got a +1. But there weren't stats or any of that sort of stuff.
Right.
And so it was
Right.
narrative and didn't start and end. Like Braunstein was, okay, here we're gonna begin Braunstein. Now it's done. Well, if we play it again, we're just gonna refresh it, just like any other board game at that time. Someone told my dad at a Gen Con, hey, you gotta see what Dave Arneson is doing
Right.
with Blackmore, this Blackmore thing that he's doing. And so he came to Lake Geneva in '72, I believe it was, not at a Gen Con, but that's how
Right,
they
yeah.
met. And he ran it for my dad, and he was like, whoa, that's cool. So through '73, he made the game. He wrote, he was on typing it with some notes from Dave Arneson, I guess, that my mom said were delivered in a in a wicker basket, like individual pages. You just write stuff down and throw it in there like scrap paper. And she was like, what am I supposed to do with this? Because my mom got pressed into service as an editor or
Right.
whatever
Of
it
course
was.
she-
Yeah,
right, right.
because she was there. And then he had it all ready to go in '73, and no one wanted it. All the established businesses didn't want
We
Dungeons
did
and
that with
Dragons.
Magic the Gathering,
Yeah.
too, years later.
Like, what is this? What is this
Right.
nonsense? No one wants to
Right,
play
right,
this, right?
exactly.
And so he talked to his best friend, Don Kay, and
Yeah.
gathered together $1,000, and they eventually
Started
got
TSR.
Tactical Studies rules,
Yep.
and then self-published Dungeons and Dragons
Right.
in those 3 books with the
Yep.
with the art.
And then eventually married the two companies together.
Yep.
Yeah, at some point
Yep.
along the way. So this is Lake Geneva. I want to keep moving on to the chronology, but I think the last show
Yeah.
in Lake Geneva has an interesting reputation.
It does.
Yes.
It does. So,
80?
77.
77. Right.
So D&D started exploding in popularity, and so
Yep.
more and more people were coming. And Lake Geneva, being a small town, the horticultural hall's tiny. It's like
Yeah.
you could fit maybe 100 people, maybe 150 people in there, and you're packed. And the American Legion Hall, I'm sure you get another 300 in there. But they were growing too big. So what was the biggest place? It was the Playboy Club in Lake Geneva.
Playboy Club.
Yep, which is
Lake
now the
Geneva.
Grand Geneva, where there's another great convention held.
Yeah. You have to really dig to find any references to Playboy at the Grand Geneva
That's true.
these days.
But yes, originally it was, and it's a sprawling place, but they had a convention center.
Right.
And so it was the biggest place in Lake Geneva where they could do it. However, it was a different time in the '70s, and they had Playboy bunnies still who would wear high heels and like one piece, push-up outfits or whatever, and so this was not a good idea because so many players
So
were
many
young.
reasons.
Yes.
There were so many young men there whose parents were dropping them off, and they were like, "I think get bigger," and be like, "No, they just keep driving, like you can't go
Go
here."
down the hall
Yeah.
and cover your eyes.
Yeah.
Yes, my mom wasn't very thrilled that I was there. Let's put it that way. So
That way.
yes,
Speaking of Lake Geneva, one of the questions we get the most, especially on social media for Gen Con, is why is it called Gen Con?
Oh, geez. Oh, sure, of course. I glossed over that. You said so. The International Federation of Wargaming. My dad came up with the name as a play on words for the Geneva Convention, which is the law of war at the Hague, the Geneva Convention. So it's just a little play on words. Gen Con. So it's Lake Geneva.
Yeah.
Geneva Convention.
It's kind of a double pun,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, Gen Con is a Geneva Convention from Lake Geneva. So it's a
it's
lot
a
of fun
wargaming.
play on words.
My
Yeah,
dad
a lot of
loved
folks-
puns
Yeah.
and silly
Yeah.
wordplay anyway.
Yeah,
A lot of folks
so-
don't know that Gen Con started out as a wargaming convention. Most people assume that we have always been RPGs, especially with
right.
Dungeons and Dragons.
They didn't exist.
And yeah, it didn't even exist.
Didn't exist.
Yeah.
Yep, it was war games.
Yeah, they were
so.
playing Fletcher Pratt naval battles and Strategos
And Mike Carr's Fight for the
Fight in
Skies.
Yeah, that's
Don't
the
Give
game.
Up the
It's
Ship.
been played every
Yes.
time, right?
Yes, it
every
has been.
every
Mike-
Gen Con.
Mike is still the only guy who's been to every Gen Con now.
So we, because of Probably because of Dungeons and Dragons. Gen Con outgrew the largest venue in Lake Geneva. And so in 1978, the convention did its first of several moves to a new city. And so it moved to Parkside, which is short for
Well, University of
University
Washington,
of Wisconsin, Parkside, and
University
Racine.
in Racine.
Right.
And you both, I never attended that long ago. I was on the West Coast. I was raised in, modest family. I dreamed of going to Gen Con. I'll put that story in here. As I was growing up, I would get Dragon magazine, every issue, of course, and read it cover to cover, because that's what you did. And there would be about 3 or 4 months before Gen Con, there would be the issue that would come out that would have the entire event listing for what Gen Con would be in the magazine.
Yep.
The
And
entire event
The
listing
listing in a magazine.
in the magazine.
And there would be
It was like a
form.
double-sized issue.
Yes, and you could tick out the form, and you could fill it out of what your events would be. And it was all broken down into time slots, and each time slot, you have a first, second, and third choice for what you wanted to play in that time slot. I knew I couldn't go, but I would take it out, and I would fill it out as if I was going to go. It was like a little fantasizing, and then I would throw it in the garbage. And so
Gonna go ahead and register.
I dreamed of going. So, but I'm not there yet. So Matt and Lisa, you guys can arm wrestle. Who wants to go? You went to Parkside first, so you're
I
going to
did.
go first.
My
So
first
you-
Gen Con was Gen Con 15,
Yes.
which was in 1982, and I grew up in southern Wisconsin, a little town called Beloit, which is, if you're going from Chicago to Madison, you blink when you cross the border, that's my hometown. And I often will tell people that if I had grown up in LA, I'd have gotten into film. If I'd grown up in New York, I'd have gotten into book publishing. I grew up in southern Wisconsin because your dad and all the other guys there, I got into being a game designer, right? And my dad would, it's kind of like what you're talking about. We would see in Dragon magazine, you get, or actually in some of the box sets too, there would be an ad for Gen Con in the back of the box set or whatever. And you would get the thing and you'd say, oh, I really want to go this. I wave at my dad. And I think the first year he said, no, screw up. We're not doing this. And the second year I finally was begging him. My parents were splitting up at the time, which I'm using a little bit of, child guilt there. They say, come on, Dad, it's a good time. And he just took me and 3 of my friends, dropped us off at Parkside, and then picked us up in the evening every day for 4 days, right?
Wow.
And it was like an hour drive each way. And you just like, yeah, I'll go out to the bar while you guys go to Gen Con. And I'll catch you at the end of the
And
day.
then drive you back home.
It was Wisconsin, okay?
Different time.
Yeah, different
Different
times.
times.
And we just had such a great time. I mean, I ended up meeting guys like Will Niebling and Marty Stever and Mike Carr playing
Right.
Fight in the Skies on the Dawn Patrol Sunday morning. It was
So
fantastic.
what was Gen Con like? Did it have an exhibit hall, dealers? I know the
Gen Con-
answer, it did.
UW
but
Parkside's
yeah.
in the middle of freaking nowhere, right?
Okay.
It's like 5 classroom buildings joined by this gigantic concourse you can walk through. The neat thing back then is every game had its own classroom, right? So when I first
Okay.
went there, you would show up and like your game would be in this little quiet classroom all by itself, right?
Right.
Not like these little curtains or whatever we have nowadays. You're yelling at each other next door to 300 other people.
Right.
Everybody was in this quiet little classroom. And the exhibit hall was in a gym that you had to walk to. That was like about 10-minute walk down a trail in the middle of the woods.
Probably further than Lucas Oil is.
A little bit, right? And it was amazing because it was like literally in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing but cornfields around us. You say it's in Racine, but it's really between Racine and Kenosha, and there's no city around it. There's no restaurants, there's no bars, there's no hotels, there's nothing, right? People would sleep in the concourse at night, right? Just kind of crash out there.
And there was a campground nearby.
There was a
That's-
campground
that's-
nearby,
That's my
exactly.
first year we went camping.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, so tell us about that, Lisa.
So, I'm the weird one here because I came because I was playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
So I came because of that, and same thing though. I'd get the Dragon magazines, and for a couple of years, so I had a pretty big group up in Minnesota. I was going to college, and I was running Dungeons and Dragons with a group up at St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota, and I think I had something like 18 or 20 people playing with me at the time, but I had a kind of a core of like about 8 or 9 of us, and there's one of my really good friends, this guy named Rich Rydberg, and And he every year he'd be like, we should go. And I was like, I don't know, man. It's way over Wisconsin. It's a long drive. And finally, so we decided to go. We decided
And
to
this
go.
is 1984?
84. So we went there,
Wow.
figuring this is going to be the mecca of D&D gaming. We're going to go there. It's going to be awesome. And we arrive in the middle of the night to this campground, trying to set up a tent in the dark. We'd forgotten tent poles. We forgot stakes. And so we're
But
literally,
you
I
had
found
dice.
I found a branch out.
What kind of adventurers are you? I mean,
We didn't have our 10-foot pole. I don't know why.
Oh, you had the 10-foot pole,
no,
you
I
just
guess
didn't have
it
tent
just-
stakes, yeah.
No, we didn't have a tent pole either. We had to grab a branch out and stuff. Anyways, it was kind of
But
crazy.
it's just, it's just crazy thinking about sleeping in a tent for 4 days while you're playing. Did you take a shower? I mean, like,
Oh, the showers were out there, and they had the showers in the campground,
Oh,
right?
they had showers in
In
the
fact, there's a
campground.
funny story. Is like is so there's a men's and a women's, right? Well, no one's in the women's. I go get my shower, and my friend's still in this line. I'm like, dude, just go take it now. I'll make sure no one gets in. So he ran into the women's shower
Yeah.
and took a shower in there because no one was going to be there, and I just made sure no one came.
Right.
And then we got to get to Gen Con before everybody else because he was able to get a shower. And,
Perfect.
But so we show up there. I have to tell Luke the story because I met your dad at this show for the first time, and the funniest thing, I was waiting to get into an elevator, and the door opened up, and there was Gary Gygax coming out, and he had these pair of googly eyes on. It's just like just popped her, and he was just grinning, and he just looked at me like, and I just like, this is Gary Gygax, and he just was having a blast. You can just tell he's having fun, right? And so that was like my first time I ever met Gary was coming out of an elevator, and you're like, But yeah, it was fun. It was, but there was no women there. I mean, it was just. So I always tell this story because I think it's hilarious. So I overheard these two young, probably 12-year-old boys are at the convention, and I heard one of them say, "What's that?" And the other guy goes, "I think that's a girl." Honest to God. And I looked around, and it was like, it was me. I was the only one there, and there was a single. And you look now, and it's like women are everywhere, right, in the convention. But that wasn't that way back then. And it was just like,
Fantastic.
so it was, but it was fun. It was just, it was Mecca. It was like going there and see all these. I mean, I'd never seen such a wealth in the exhibit hall. I'd never seen such a wealth of games
Oh,
and
God,
stuff.
it's
And just, our little hobby store didn't have that much up in Minnesota, and we had a good one, Little Tin Soldier, and
Yeah, so were you there at Parkside?
Yes,
Do you remember
absolutely.
Parkside?
Yeah, sure. They had a little like cantina and stuff too, and there was like
Yep.
some video games. They had Tron down
There's
there.
a bowling alley. I think.
The bowling alley.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
but I remember playing like video games
Yeah, yeah.
and stuff too. That was great. And like I think Car Wars was relatively came out
Yeah,
sometime
yeah.
right in that 88 from there, and so I'd play the heck out of that. That was a lot of fun. And Traveler and all sorts of games. So
Right,
I
'cause
played D&D at home. So I played this stuff.
1980, by the early 80s, you have a lot of the RPGs that came out inspired by Dungeons and Dragons. And so, you've got, I don't know which ones. They were like, RuneQuest had to have been out. in that
probably.
era.
RuneQuest was out because
Yep.
we were
Yeah.
playing it in hard at the time.
Because you like to play RuneQuest.
Yeah, I
maybe,
played
Dave, or is
RuneQuest,
that-
and it was like first or second edition. I don't
And
remember.
Harn?
Harn, yeah. I remember Columbia
Oh,
Games
Harn.
came out with Harn at that year. Actually, I went to.
And maybe the Fantasy Trip, maybe, or
Yeah.
Group-
Well, that was earlier.
Yeah, I was gonna say EPT, Empire of the Pedal Throne.
Empire of the Pedal
That was
Throne.
Yeah,
one of the
yeah.
early
Cool.
ones. Yeah.
Do you remember what you played at?
I actually ended up playing a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. I played Fight in the Skies. I was heavily into like Boot Hill and Gangbusters and those came out and all that kind of stuff. And
Boot
I played
Hill,
any
yeah.
goddamn
Star
thing-
Frontiers.
Star Frontiers, anything I could get my teeth on. It was
Yeah,
great.
actually, that's my question for you guys, is that now at Gen Con this year, we just surpassed 20,000 events. And obviously, there weren't that many events over the course of the weekend at Gen Con. So
Fit in a
were
thing
there,
that big.
were there things that you went to play, or were you like, man, I'm here, I'm going to play everything?
I played everything. I actually, the first year I went just as a player. The second year I showed up as a game master. I worked with the RPGA, Role Playing Gamers Association, and started running events. And recently, one of my sons found a bunch of these modules in the attic of my dad's house. Like stuff like I'd run that Frank Mentzer had written, Jeff Grubb had written, all this kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
they're just, like,
They're
printed
like
off on-
fold-out printouts,
fold-out
right? Like on
printouts,
dot
yeah.
matrix printers and
I still have
stuff.
some of those.
Right? And it was amazing to look through this stuff. Jeff Martin actually wrote a Marvel Superheroes module. And Jeff, who now runs True Dungeon, right? I'm like,
Right.
that can't be the same Jeff. That's a pretty common name. He's like, no, that was me.
it
I'm like,
is.
okay, shit, I ran your, when I was 17 years old or whatever, 16 years old, I ran your event at Gen Con
Right.
that you had written. It's crazy.
Oh, that's crazy.
It was great times. You play whatever came your way. I would just pour over the catalog for months ahead of time, trying to make sure I had every 2-hour, 4-hour slots, slammed up. So I was busy the entire time. I would walk out of there. My mother every year would say, "What the hell's happened to you? Because your voice is gone. You look like you've been killed. A truck has run you over." But I had the greatest time, right? Every time.
Right.
You never got sleep.
You mentioned RPGA, and that was like just at the end there, and that was actually a big thing that helped propel Gen Con, because like I got there and I have to tell you, my games were kind of up and down in terms of how quality of the games, but
That could still happen.
they were really pushing the RPGA, and actually my first Gen Con, they had a thing. If you joined the RPGA, and you had to pay a membership fee to get in.
Right.
They had a couple of these young artists that were there that were like they do character sketches. A guy named Elmore, Easley, Parkinson, Caldwell, and these guys were all they'd just been hired, and they literally had them sitting on this thing, and you go up and say, "Well, my character is an elf. It's about this tall. And he has this long sword." And so I got Clyde Caldwell drew my character for me. I still have it on my wall in
very
my
cool.
office. But
Oh
that
my
was like
gosh.
I got that as part of getting into RPGA, and then we played some RPGA games, and they were so good. And so from there on out, that was like my thing. I went to Gen Con for RPGA, and
Right.
like morning, noon, night, 8 a.m. till midnight.
So what was RPGA?
The Role Playing Gamers Association.
Yeah,
it
what
was-
did you do? What was
You
part
played
of the
you played
membership?
games.
It was owned by TSR. It was
Right.
basically their group that did organized play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I had a
there you
membership
go.
card.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I did too.
I had a
Actually-
membership card and I was a level 1 player. That's it. Level 1. My dad, because you had to pay for it. So,
You did have to pay for
so
it. Well, yeah.
I wrote, I gave my dad the idea for Legion of Gold. It was a Gamma
Oh,
World
yeah,
1,
yeah.
the old module. So he gave me a
Remember that.
with credit on it. And my payment was 1-year membership in the RPGA for helping him out with that.
Your
Seriously,
dad-
give me
your
1
dad
year
paid you
with a
a
1-year
membership.
Yeah,
to the
not like a lifetime.
RPGA.
1
1
year.
year.
1 year.
Actually,
year.
He was a hard bargainer.
You should be mowing lawns by next year.
The thing is, if you were good and you actually won one RPG stuff, they would give you like credit
Extensions, yeah.
and extensions.
That's true.
And so I actually never paid again for my
Yeah, same here,
RPG
actually.
membership. 'cause I
My
kept
first one
winning.
I actually won from your daddy. It was at a convention at Beloit College. And me and my group, we won the tournament. He signed our books and everything. And my present, before even the prize, even before the RPG existed, before the Polyhedron came out, which was their newsletter, was a 1-year subscription. I'm like, great. And I never paid for it again after that.
Well, and even though
They were great about renewals.
And even though the RPGA was started by TSR and the Dungeons and Dragons company, but with some other games like Blue Hill, if I remember correctly, the RPGA was open to all types of role-playing
Yeah, it
games.
was. Yeah.
Like you could,
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe.
it strongly
Kind
went
of.
toward TSR games, right?
yeah,
Technically, you bring other stuff in, but it leaned heavily on the TSR.
sure,
Yeah.
sure.
But you could do whatever you want. And obviously, in the newsletters and stuff, they were a little bit more broad. My first published thing I ever did was in the Polyhedron, like number 9 or something like that. When I was like 16, I entered
Mine's Polyhedron 25.
there you go. When I was like 16, I entered the top secret gadget contest.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I came in, I was a runner-up for like this rebreather thing for James Bond type stuff. And it got published in a magazine. That extended my subscrition for another year. So as long as you keep writing it, it keeps coming to you.
Or
It's
winning.
amazing.
Right.
So about 1985, how many people were coming to Gen Con at that time?
I think it was about 5,000, maybe
Yeah, about
3,000.
5,000,
Sounds
yeah.
about right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a few more people today. Do
Yeah.
you guys know that approximately the entire population number of Flagstaff, Arizona now attends Gen Con?
There you go. That's pretty wild.
Wow,
We've grown a
that's-
bit
That's
since
like,
then.
yeah, that's awesome. So we have speaking of 1985, I think that's the year Gen Con moved again
To Milwaukee.
to Milwaukee.
I had my
Milwaukee.
first booth at Gen Con that year.
You had a first booth at
I had a
Gen Con.
booth when I was, the year I turned 17, I was going from 16 to 17. My dad said, you need to either get a job or start a business. I'm like, well, I don't want to work for anybody. So I actually started this little mini magazine, you call it a zine nowadays, called the Quill and Scroll. And it was about general gaming. We covered Wizards, not Wizards, obviously we covered TSR, Avalon Hill, Chaosium, everything we could find. And it only lasted 2 whole issues. But I had a booth at Gen Con where we were selling subscriptions. That didn't go very far. The funny,
I have that somewhere.
you might. There was 2 issues. There's one with a red cover and one with a white cover. The funny part is, like 3 years ago, I was playing at a D&D event with a game master named Chuck Benscoter. And I'm like, okay, great, nice to meet you. He was a great guy. We was playing with all my kids. We had a wonderful time. And the other, about a year ago, I was looking through the old files, and I'm like, oh, here's the old Quill and Scroll stuff. Who are my subscribers? Chuck Benscoter was one of my subscribers from when I was 16 years old.
Wow.
You know, and then I ended up playing D&D with him 20 years later, or 30 years later, not even realizing it. Here at Gen Con.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow. So Luke, do you remember the move to
Yeah.
Milwaukee?
Yep. Yeah, because I mean, gosh, I guess.
Was that a big thing for your dad?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, that
like,
was, because it was a little bit further away from Lake Geneva, but it was definitely a sign that it was now big
A real
time.
thing,
You know,
yeah.
I mean, Parkside was pretty cool, but it was just, it was better organized. It was more, it was a lot of work from like guys like
Right.
it was like Skip and Dave
Yeah.
Conant maybe and those guys were having to
Yeah.
work through that stuff and the RPGA and all that. But I'm sure my dad didn't bring that part home with him so much. I just remember, making the drive up there, we couldn't stay home anymore. We'd have to
Well,
stay.
and I'm also remembering it was about then when your dad
Yes.
was forced to leave the company.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
Yeah,
was that-
that was definitely a traumatic
Yeah, of course.
event for the family. So, of course, it's a great story. My family, my dad's story is a wonderful story. He was, a cobbler. He was a shoe repairman in Lake Geneva with 5 kids. We were on food stamps. My mom gardened and canned food and to subsist on. So he really had nothing. And he gambled it all. Like I said, he had to borrow $1,000. His best friend borrowed $1,000 on his life insurance,
Yeah.
and they went out on a wing and a prayer and said, "I believe in this. It could sell 10,000 copies." That's how much my dad believed in this. Did a little bit better than that. And, but yeah, so he suddenly went from the black
Yeah.
sheep of the family. He was a high school dropout.
Right.
All this sorts of stuff, and then suddenly lots of
Yeah.
people idolizing him. But again, he was a shoe repairman. And he didn't think, he got 10,000 copies. Everything was friendly. It was a cottage industry.
Right.
You knew each other's handshake deals. So none of his IP was protected
Yeah.
individually. It belonged to the company.
Right.
So his best friend that he started the company with had a heart attack at like 36, Don K. And that's why it said, Gygax and K, the G and K, that was what that was for. And so my dad brought in some outside investors. That opened up, the
Yeah.
weakness
Yeah.
later that cracked. And there's a whole lot there. And then he lost everything, spent all his money trying to get the company back, couldn't do it. Brought out another game system that they ended up suing him about and bankrupting another company.
I have an autographed copy of that.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
enjoyed playing it, but it was
Yeah.
pretty complex.
I
But,
worked for,
I
I worked for
think,
New Infinities when I was in college.
Yeah,
That's where I
that's
met you,
right. Yeah,
actually,
absolutely.
back in the day.
Yeah.
So.
So he kind of went, he had this meteoric rise,
Yeah.
and then this kind of tragedy, and then it smoothed off, and he was really kind of, almost forgotten about, except for, core gamers who still played first edition and stuff. His names were taken off the books. And then I remember, third edition came around, and the change, Wizards of the Coast bought, TSR and Dungeons and Dragons, obviously. And, then there was kind of it was like mending that was good. He was brought back into the D&D community, and he felt, felt very welcomed again. That made him happy. So I know he liked
good.
you, he enjoyed your company, and thought that was a great thing. So
I think one of my most treasured moments was also at Gen Con. We're jumping way further in time. I think it was the year we launched third edition D&D, so that would have been
It was the year
1999.
before, actually. I think it was the year we
Yeah,
announced it.
You're
You're talking about the one on stage where
No.
we did the big
So
stage
my-
thing where he and Dave came on?
No, that's not the photo I'm talking about. No, we had a big VIP dinner, and your father was sitting at a table with myself and Richard Garfield.
yes,
That picture, you posted it
I
recently.
did. I
Yeah.
did post that picture
And
recently.
Richard, who designed Magic the Gathering, and your father designed Dungeons and Dragons, the 2 greatest games ever invented, in my opinion, in the history of the world. And here the 2 of them are. They never met each other. So they meet each other, and they just couldn't stop telling each other how much they respected the other person's work, and how, and it was like, okay, this is the way life should be between, collegial and friendly even from, if the guy that invented Dungeons and Dragons, the guy that invented Magic the Gathering can get together and it's just wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was
So back, if we're in like the late 80s now, is that right?
Yes.
About
Something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, we're gonna go into from the late 80s, mid 80s through the 90s is all in
It's like,
Milwaukee.
so I got a fun story about
Yes.
Milwaukee, and this is what I always tell the story because I think it shows what Gen Con can be and what Gen Con was. And so my first year, I think it was the first year in Milwaukee. It was the year they came out with the battle system for AD&D, when they tried to bring wargaming to Dungeons and Dragons. And so and my friend Rich Ryberg and I had gotten to Milwaukee early. We're walking in the upstairs part of the Mecca, and we get, someone yells, "Hey, you want to come play battle system? We're about to play the first game of battle system." We're like, "Oh yeah, I read about this in Dragon. This sounds like fun. Let's go do it." So we go over there and play, and we were playing the good guy. No, we were playing the bad guys, and the other 10 guys were playing the good guys. And it turns out, long story short, the guys we were playing against were Ed Greenwood and Mike Nystel. And we didn't know it at the time, so we were, and so we were playing, and the fun thing was everybody was playing this like a traditional war game, and at one point I'm like, "Hey, you got a cleric that can part water, right? Yeah. Why don't we just part in the middle of the river? He's got guys at the bridges. We'll just go right through the middle of the river and stuff like that." And it was just like, it's like like what magic would do to a battlefield. And it was just like once everybody did that, it's like, okay, I'm going to polymorph your commander into a flounder. Or I'm going to, and all of a sudden it became like a D&D adventure. But I mean, for what first like 2 hours was this like tactical thing where we're guarding the bridges, the town. I'm going to feint this way, and it was like, crap, I can fly. And so, anyways, it was fun. I remember I got Ed and Mike to sign my player's handbook after the
cool.
game and stuff like that. But it was just like, that would happen. You could just run into people, like famous people, just playing games and sit down. And that was what kind of like made me really like, I'm never going to miss Gen Con again.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you weren't camping anymore by this time?
Oh, no, we're staying right at the Hyatt Regency.
Harder
there.
to camp in downtown Milwaukee, to be honest with you.
But you could stay at the UW Mass
Yeah, you could.
Milwaukee.
Oh, yes, you
You have
could.
in Milwaukee
In the
dorms.
old-
The
in the old
dorms, yes. That's why I stayed with my high school buddies when we went there.
So you've been coming to Gen Con for years by this point as an attendee, as a big RPG fan, RPGA fan. At some point, you came to Gen Con for the first time as an exhibitor.
Yeah.
So
87.
when was that?
So
And
1987,
What
so-
was the company? What were you doing?
All right, so we started, we're a bunch of basic gamers, and so actually, it's kind of a funny story. Because I was in the RPGA and I got published in issue 25 of Polyhedron, I was like a big shot, right? And so I knew people. I knew Skip Williams, I knew Penny Williams, Penny Petticord back then.
Yeah.
And I knew a bunch of people, right? Howard.
Right.
And so, it was like when my friends of mine were going to start a game company, they're like, "You know people in the game industry. We want you to be in our game company." And so we started this little game company called Lion Rampant Games, and we did a game called Ars Magica. We were working on it, but we decided
A little game called Ars Magica, but I mean, this is a very important game.
it is an important game in terms. It was never important sales-wise, but it was important in terms of.
That we like to say critically acclaimed, right? Critically acclaimed.
But the first year, we didn't have that game. We were working on it, and we had a thing called Whimsy cards.
Yeah,
We had these little Whimsy cards, and so we got a booth, and we went into the Gen Con exhibit hall, and we had all these Whimsy cards. That's all we had, a big table of these Whimsy cards, and we had made these flimsy versions, 'cause, you screw up because you don't know anything about printing. So the first version you make of them, they came and they're all like flimsy. We said we can't
Right.
sell these, so we had to make them again.
You can't call them
And-
flimsy cards.
But we call them flimsy whimsies.
Flimsy
We had flimsy whimsies, and we were giving them out to people. Hey, would you like a flimsy whimsy? And we were just begging people to come and buy our stuff. And I'll never forget one of the guys that comes up. This guy comes up, he's asking us what this is, and he buys a copy. And as he's paying, his badge flips over and it says Dave Arneson. And we're just like, holy cow, it's Dave Arneson's buying our product right here at Gen Con. And so it was just, it was kind of one of those moments where you're like, holy cow, here we are,
Right.
and just, but that was Gen Con, and then next year we launched Ars Magica and
Yep. And then eventually it came back
White
as
Wolf,
part of White Wolf.
Vampire,
And so White Wolf, when did White Wolf start coming to Gen Con?
White Wolf, White Wolf became White Wolf, because so Lion Rampant merged with White Wolf magazine in 90, 90.
I don't know if Lisa
think it
mentioned,
was.
I don't know if you mentioned it in your bio, for those who don't know, you worked at White Wolf for a number of years, you were a VP at White Wolf eventually, and you organized the merger.
It's like 6 people living in a house,
Yeah,
friend.
yeah.
You know, everybody's a VP, right?
Right,
But you understand
yeah,
that.
yeah.
But,
I do,
yeah.
yeah.
But, you know, it's, and so, yeah, so Vampire came out and then
1992?
92.
Yep.
Yep,
Vampire the
92.
Masquerade.
That was a pretty big deal.
That was
That
a pretty
was
big deal.
Very big
That was
deal,
a pretty big deal.
yeah.
That was a pretty big deal. I remember we had so many people that we couldn't basically take money quick enough. So Mark Reinig and grabbed a garbage bag, and people were just throwing $20 bills into this garbage bag.
Oh my
And we were
gosh.
handing people Vampire copies as they were selling out.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Horrible for accounting, though.
Wow.
Yeah, that's definitely coming.
So, Matt, did you start another company and come back as exhibitor again?
I ended up working for a lot of different companies, like Iron Crown and Complau and Grenadier Models as a booth monkey, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So I would wander around and do demos and such. And then I started, I was in college, I worked for Games Workshop, and I came back and started freelancing. And, you know, I would hang out with all these other freelancers and talk about stuff. I ended up meeting a guy named Shane Hensley.
Yep.
We started a company called Pinnacle Entertainment
Pinnacle,
Group, and we
right.
came out with Deadlands. So we had our first big booth back in '96 in Milwaukee. And I was the president of that company for 4 years before I ended up, we had kids and we moved back to Wisconsin. Not me and Shane, me and my wife. And where we had, you know, free babysitting from people you trust implicitly is priceless, essentially. Which is great, because then we had quadruplets 3 years later after we moved to Wisconsin, and
Right.
dear God, we needed it then. Yeah, so I ran a booth for Pinnacle for 4 years, but I'd been working in booths the entire time before that. And you know, even the year the quads were born, when they were born on June 5th, 2002, I still came up to Gen Con that year. We hired a night nurse so I could run back and forth to Gen Con. And I actually didn't spend a night in Milwaukee. I would just drive up to Milwaukee, come back every night, feed the kids at 2 in the morning, 5 in the morning, and go back to the show.
Wow.
It was a crazy week, mind you, but it was a great time. I've still, to this day, have not missed a Gen Con since I started going.
Right. So, we're just flying. You know, we have 52 years to cover in 1 hour, and it's just like a hopeless little task.
Exactly.
Do our best.
I think what I could, though, I mean, we could, you know, eventually Gen Con moved to Indianapolis.
That wasn't until 2003.
That was in
I would love
2003.
to, Luke, you brought a really cool book that I love that not everyone knows exists. So let's talk about 40 years of Gen Con for a second.
Yeah.
Yes, so this is a book that Robin Laws wrote this book on the 40th anniversary of Gen Con. I went to Atlas Games and asked them if they wanted to, if they would be interested in doing it. And we wanted to do a memorial sort of book in honor of Gen Con history. And, but we weren't a publisher at the time. So, because this was in, well, I mean, somebody do the math.
So 12 years ago.
12 years ago.
Yeah. So I during a rare break when I didn't have a publishing company. So I went to and John and Michelle said, yeah, we'll do it. And they we brought Robin Laws into it and interviewed a lot of people. And it's got all sorts of great pictures of
actually
all
my-
the venues.
My dad's copy that I
That's-
took off.
Oh,
his
very
book.
cool.
Aw.
Gary's
Wow,
copy
okay.
of,
And never
of the
returned to
book.
him.
One of the things I love about that book is that it includes pictures from 1968 until 2006, I want to say, like the year
Yeah.
before the book was published.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
it's
so-
actually, well, the cool part is like, I went and looked through all my old photographs and sent a bunch in. John Nephew's wife did a great job of like just reaching out and asking everybody, hey, do you have something you can send, some photos you can send and stuff. It was cool, because you forget what you all have, you know, you stacked away into a box somewhere and
Yeah. So what I want to do is give you an opportunity if anybody has a question in the audience.
No?
Yeah, Seth, you promised us a question from the audience.
Yeah. So what is the memory that each of you have that immediately pops in your mind when you hear the words Gen Con? The thing that fills you with joy. What is it that you have in your hearts that excites you every year when you come here?
I think it's a great idea.
So the question for folks at home is,
Thank you.
what is the memory that pops in your head? You know, what's that great thing that pops in your head when you hear the words Gen Con?
Great. I think that's a great way, and that'll be about enough to bring us home.
Yeah,
So,
for me, it's changed over the years, right? When I first started to go, it was like going with my friends, blah, 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 playing games with amazing people, blah. Now it's going there with my kids, right? And to me, Gen Con is Christmas and a family reunion and your high school reunion and everything else wrapped up into one. It's my favorite time of year. And literally, I would skip Christmas before I skip Gen Con, right? So to me, it's just about friends and family having a wonderful time together.
Great.
Yeah, I would say the thing that I think about with Gen Con is the excitement I had as a kid, young, playing, whether it was Car Wars or Traveler, like those iconic games, and just staying up super late and, being so tired the next day that you sleep on like a couple of folding chairs in the hallway and catch a cat nap or something because you don't want to miss the games, but you just can't keep your head up anymore. And of course, that was my gamer family, right? And a lot of people I would only see, once a year probably when they would come in, those guys, and we'd continue those games and keep everything going. And now it's more of just a holy smokes, look at this thing, in that vendor, the vendor room and all the neat stuff that's there. It's just like it is a spectacle at this point. It is like wow, it's just awe-inspiring. And of course, I still see usually hang out with the same people I'd see at other places too. Because, but it's good to see everybody again.
Right.
Here too. It's also like a gathering. You gotta be here and see my gamer family.
Right.
I mean, I agree with Matt that when you were a gamer, it was a very different thing. I was always looking forward to, there was always some cool new release like the Temple of Elemental Evil or something that I was looking forward to at the convention, and that you would just plan your convention. Oriental Adventures came out, and I remembered, playing in some of the first things of that, and so it was all really focused on those kind of new releases. But I guess as now as an exhibitor and an owner of a company through the years, it always focuses around these releases. I mean, us, publishers, we tend to, Gen Con's the mecca for us too, and it's become this place where you put your best foot forward every year, and where and so it's, I just have memories of Ars Magica and Vampire and Magic the Gathering and Dungeons & Dragons and all these different games through the years that I've been involved with. And just those being Pathfinder and everything just being released at the convention, and I can that moment when that exhibit hall door opens up and you see the huge mass of gamers and they rush in, the eager faces, looking for those games. That's the indelible moment now that as a publisher that and I told Peter I almost didn't do this thing because we were launching Pathfinder 2nd Edition at our booth, and I was like, I didn't want to miss that. I didn't want to be there when they opened the booth up, but thankfully I was able to get that 15 minutes and then come over here for this.
Yeah.
But
Well, we've got a few more minutes. I would love really quick if we could cover a couple more important points in Gen Con history, which you two especially, with the launch of Magic the Gathering.
Yes.
So, Peter, you said you wished to go to Gen Con for a really long time.
Yes.
And the first opportunity you got to go is when you started your own company, Wizards of the Coast, and you attended
That's
in 1992. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And then the next year you came back and
Yes, and we launched, so we came in 1992, Lisa and I.
Yep,
we
we
were
did.
together. Lisa was the old pro.
I was the old
The
pro. Introducing
You've
him to
been
everybody.
introducing me to everybody. You've been going to Gen Con for
remember
a
that.
decade already.
and Lisa was the first employee of Wizards of the
First,
Coast.
first
first paid
full-time
employee.
paid employee, yeah.
There was a lot of volunteers.
Because Beverly might be watching, and I think Beverly
like,
would say
Beverly
she was the
came 2
first.
weeks
She
later.
was the first paid employee. You were first full-time paid employee. I think Beverly has corrected me on this. So you both have a certain.
We each have our own niche.
A certain pride there. So we, so in 1993, our second Gen Con at Wizards of the Coast, we came with Magic the Gathering, and the story I remember from that is the fact that we bet the whole company on this because our role-playing products.
We literally bet the whole company on this. If
Yeah,
this doesn't
yeah.
go off,
Yeah, we're out of business.
you never hear Wizard
That's
Ghost
it.
again.
Because we had critically acclaimed role-playing games. The Prime Order.
Talislanta.
Talislanta. And so a bunch of us went out there. We got our booth together, and so just like today, the rhythm of the show was the same, and that Wednesday was the day you go in and set up and get all ready for the show, and then it would start Thursday morning. Well, Wednesday, our Magic the Gathering product wasn't
show up.
wasn't there.
Yeah, it was stuck in customs in LA.
Stuck in customs. Yeah, and so
It was coming
Thur-
over, you know.
Thursday morning, it's still not there.
I'm on the phone constantly trying to freaking figure out how to get this.
move. Yeah, by the end of the day, Thursday all day, by the end of the day, Thursday it still wasn't there. Friday morning, it wasn't there.
But we
Right.
released it in customs.
Released. And so Magic, and people, there was a few people that knew about Magic, because even though it hadn't been officially released yet, we'd done some promotion, we'd done some retailer visits at stores, we had shown Magic the Gathering cards at Origins,
Yep.
and so there was a buzz about it. There were people just hanging out at our booth waiting for it to show up. And so early afternoon on Friday, we get the word that our Magic cards have arrived, and so we're like, a bunch of the gamers that were hanging out waiting to buy followed us back to the loading docks and helped us carry all these boxes of Magic. So you imagine 20 gamers in a row.
But they were like,
And when he says all these boxes, it wasn't
all
that
carrying
many. It was
cases,
a lot.
not display boxes, but cases
Yeah,
of
it was a
Alpha
lot.
Magic the Gathering cards, of course, which are just
Yeah.
like, $9.95 for a starter deck, right? And so
They're like $7.95 back
Seven,
then.
yeah, $7 or $8.95, yeah. And so we bring them up to our booth and start selling these cards. And the first, for about the first hour, we sell out to all the people that we sell the cards to all the people that were waiting for it. And then they all go away.
Start playing.
And then you're back to just the hard demo, I call it. Magic was not an easy game to demo in that short window of time when people didn't know what it was. It was like, well, the art was beautiful. People would see the art and come up. But the idea that each player had to have their own deck of cards was a tough sell. Like, just like, I
remember
gotta
being
buy,
resistant to it. I was
I
like,
gotta buy 2 decks of cards to play this game.
Luke was like,
That's just.
And they're random? I don't get all the
and they're
cards?
random. I don't get all the cards. And so they would just kind of, okay, buy, them and their friend would
Give
go
me
out
2
and buy.
boosters.
Yeah,
Or a deck
yeah,
of
yeah, no,
dwarves
just the
or
decks.
whatever,
Yeah, and then that would be on Friday. And then Saturday, we'd be there. All these people that had bought decks of Magic cards the previous day, they come back to the booth and they're just excited, like, oh my God, this game is amazing. Now, what were those booster packs you were talking about? Like I could just take those cards because nobody knew, nobody had ever did a collectible or a trading card game at the time. This is just completely new. And so they're like, I can just take these cards and put them in my deck. And I go, oh, but or maybe some of them you don't want to put in your deck. You might take some cards out of your deck too. Oh, really? And so they're all rushing off to play those. And then Sunday, those same people are coming back to the booth, to the deck, to the booth, and saying, "Can I just buy a whole box of those booster packs?" and I went home. So that was Gen Con '93.
But remember also that thing. I mean, by the time Saturday came around, we were literally, because we didn't have any cash registers. We were just writing we had a little pad for like writing sales. And we were writing these little like sales receipts on these pads as fast as we could write them. We were taking cash, and there was a line, and the Gen Con staff was coming up and going, you're blocking other people's, booths and things. And we're like, sorry, we're running as fast as we can, and stuff like that. And it was crazy. And literally as fast as we could take the money, we were selling the stuff.
Yeah, it was very cool.
And then there was a moment when your wife at the time, Kathy, had all the cash on the bed in your bedroom, I think, and it was this huge pile of cash. It was like more cash than we'd ever seen in our lifetime.
And then Peter, you went home and quit your day job.
I went
after
home and quit
Gen
my
Con,
day.
right?
Yeah, for the first 3 years of Wizards, I was working as a Boeing engineer,
Yeah.
and I went home the next day after Gen Con and went in and to my boss and said, "Well, I'm quitting working at Boeing." And my boss was really happy because he'd invested in.
Was that Vince?
That was Bruce Lindquist.
Oh, Bruce,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
To end our stream here, we're out of time.
Okay.
Something that strikes me that's in common with all of you is you started going to Gen Con, or at least being interested in going to Gen Con as part of the community, right? And now you are either involved in the gaming community or adjacent to it. And what's it like to go from being a gamer to, Lisa, you're the CEO of Paizo, Matt, you write so many articles, Luke, you run GaryCon. What is it like to go from part of the community to, being in the business?
To me, the best thing about the gaming industry, one of the greatest things about it, I work in like video games and novels and science fiction, fantasy, all this kind of stuff. This group of people, the line between pro and fan is so blurry that it almost doesn't exist, right? We all start out as fans, and even when we become professionals, we're fans.
Yeah.
And a lot of the fans will step over and become pros and do amazing things as well. And because you don't really have this velvet rope you got to get past or anything like that. We're all just here to have fun with each other as gamers, more than anything else.
And incorporate in your answer, we always give everybody a couple minutes to talk about what their projects are, what you're doing. Feel free
What
to
are you working
plug.
on right now?
My newest things, I'm doing Endless Quest Dungeons and Dragons books.
They're
right?
awesome, by the way.
Which 4 came out back in September of last year, 2 more coming out this coming September. I worked on Rage 2, which is a video game that came out back in the fall, or in the spring. Lots of stuff I can't talk about. I got some original novels, I'm writing Halo novels, all sorts of different things. Yeah.
All right.
So gamers are good people. I think I've grown up around gamers. I have grown up gaming. Flint refers to me as the first person who's I'm whatever, patient zero, the only one who's ever been raised with games, role-playing games around me
Yeah.
from birth. So so I was born into D&D, and so it's just kind of, this is, so many of these people are like relatives, uncles and stuff to me. And gamers are generally really generous, good-hearted people, and I like being part of that community. I am a full-time National Guardsman, so I'm a soldier primarily. So I do operations officer for the 224th Sustainment Brigade Dragon Slayers. And besides that, I organize GaryCon with my family.
Yes, that's what I was waiting for.
Yeah, so that's
Yes.
a memorial convention in honor of my father in our hometown of Lake Geneva.
Lake Geneva.
Which
Gary
is
Con.
ironically in the same venue that used to be the old Playboy Club.
Right.
It's now, it is not a Playboy Club any longer. It's the Grand Geneva Resort and Spa. And we get together and hang out, and it's just a little smaller than Gen Con, but I get to hang out with a lot of great people, and we play games and remember my dad and kind of honor him
Yes.
for doing that. And then I got into the streaming thing to tell some of the new gamers about
Right.
the history a little bit. So I did
Right.
Founders and Legends on my dad's birthday, 27th, and streamed that, and I believe it was mirrored on your
It was.
on Gen Con, so thank you so much
Yes,
for
you're welcome.
doing that.
Of course.
And that was cool. I got to hang out and game with a lot of great folks and some of my dad's old friends and stuff. It's just it's just people come together and do stuff. And even a dude, Deborah Ann Wool is like a real actress. I just emailed her and said, hey, you want to come? And she said, yeah. And we came and played. Matt Mercer's a busy guy, kind of a popular voice actor, just came and hung out. And, Steve Chenault from Arkansas, and Jeff Chalanian came like a couple days notice from the East Coast, and
Right.
everybody's got together. And so next year,
That's
hopefully,
Yeah.
it won't be so close to Gen Con, and maybe you can come hang out and play with us too. So I'm
That's great.
recruiting you right
All right.
now.
All right. All right. How about you,
It's
Lisa?
the same thing. Gamers. I started my first game company from my gaming group, right? It was my people I was gaming with saying we can make a game too, and that's a real common story. So it's we haven't fallen too far from the tree. Maybe we don't play as much at Gen Con because we're working,
Right.
but we still go home and play. Every night there's a game group at Paizo that's playing something. It's not our stuff. Sometimes it's other people's stuff. Sometimes it's board games, whatever. But it's just we're all gamers, and this place is like family. It's like I can't walk down the hall without running into people I know. And maybe sometimes it might be people there's people in Seattle I see once a year at Gen Con.
Yeah, exactly.
And stuff like that. It's just
Yes.
weird, right?
That's
Yes.
awesome. There's a whole bunch of gamers in Los Angeles that I see in Lake Geneva at GaryCon.
Yes.
The Burger Hobos, they all come there, and it's like,
That's right.
yeah,
That's
we
right.
see.
But that's part of that family and story and history and things, and it's just like maybe we don't see each other as much anymore or work with each other, but you're just I keep seeing people. I saw someone today who used to work with me, and I was like, It's like, I just realized I've worked with so many different people in this industry that they're all just like this long contiguous family, and Gen Con's our big family get together.
Yes. And your plug, Paizo?
Oh yeah, I got this thing called Pathfinder Second
Pathfinder
Edition.
Second Edition.
You may have heard of it.
Little things.
Yes, coming out.
By the way, we brought a lot of copies, so don't stand in line if you don't need to, because you could probably come on Saturday and not have to stand in line, maybe.
Then you got like
I thought you were going to say buy
Best.
two.
Yeah.
Just buy two, just in case.
Yeah.
Peter, you've answered the question too.
yeah. So we're okay. What was?
How does it feel like to go from gaming community to being involved in the gaming industry?
Oh, it's just crazy. It's just wonderful. I mean, that's like a dream come true. To be here. We talked about favorite Gen Con moments. The moment when we opened the exhibit hall. Of course, I'm a bit of a ham. I get to stand up on stage and welcome everybody. That of course that makes it fun. But it's that excitement and seeing all these, everybody coming in for the opening day, because I know what a joy it is to them, and I know that when they get into the hall, they're going to see all the exhibitors and all the new games, and it's just so exciting, and it's so exciting to reflect back on how far we've come as a community.
Yeah.
From, I say there was nothing cool about being a geek in 1978. Well, it was cool, but nobody else knew it, right? This is the problem. It's like we knew it was cool.
amongst
Exactly.
the initiates.
The two people I knew in high school who played Dungeons and Dragons and myself, we knew how cool it was. But now, now that we've come so far as a community,
Yeah.
and that's absolutely fantastic.
And
So
just think about it. How
Yeah.
many hundreds of thousands of hours of joy
yes,
is
yeah.
you organizing this event?
Yeah.
How much
Absolutely.
joy
Well,
does that bring to the world?
And we wouldn't be able to if your father hadn't started the
Yeah.
convention 52 years ago and gone on to invent Dungeons and Dragons and all the great game designers who produce all the games that we love. Richard Garfield, Magic the Gathering.
A big thing, you did pick it up when,
Yeah.
Hasbro dropped it. I mean, they would have,
Yes.
if they would not have kept this going, and,
Better
you didn't need to, you could have gone off and done something else, retired.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that brings an end to our this episode of Fireside with Peter Adkison. I want to thank Matt Forbeck, Luke Gygax, and Lisa Stephen for joining us today.
Thanks for having us, Pete.
Yes, thank you. Thanks to Christy Jensen for co-hosting with me. Thank you for watching us and being, loyal subscribers to our new show. We have so thanks to Gen Con TV for hosting us. Thanks. Usually we are filming from Chaldea Studios, my other company, which is our usual hosting site. So thanks to their efforts. And we will be back starting season 2 of Fireside with Peter Adkison in August 14th.
Yep.
Excellent.
And we're going to continue.
What's the topic gonna be?
We're going to continue the theme.
Continue
for
magic. We've got so
together.
much.
Yeah, there were so many good stories that worked so well, and there were so many people. Like now, I've got a whole list of well, you didn't bring me onto this show. Oops. Okay, so I better work on that. So, all right. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you
you.
all for coming
Bye.
and seeing us. Yes. And thanks to Zombie Orpheus Entertainment for operating the equipment here and
Thank you,
producing
Zoe.
the show for
Yeah.
us. Thank you. Right.
All right.
We're good.
Out.